My name is Rowan Vega. For 4 years, I lived and breathed one thing: designing Raven X, the world's most advanced autonomous drone system. Faster, smarter, untouchable. It was supposed to change warfare and change my life. But just days before the $2.7 billion defense contract was finalized, my boss fired me. Then he stole it. Or thought he did. Because the system he took wasn't the one I built for war. It was the one I built for them to lose. It all started at 9 a.m. On a morning so perfect, it almost made me forget what was coming. The test flight began that morning, and within 12 minutes, I watched my creation do what no one else in the defense sector had managed before. From behind the glass wall of the control tower, I tracked every movement of the Raven X drone. My drone. It sliced through desert wind like a blade through water, adjusting flight vectors in real time, identifying threats, dodging phantom missiles in simulation, even executing a reverse spiral evasive I hadn't programmed. It had taught itself. That wasn't just a successful trial. That was history. They clapped, politely. Of course, suits with defense clearances don't cheer. But I could feel it. The shift in the room. My name was being whispered with weight. I'd done it. I stepped outside into the dry heat and called Mom. She picked up right away. Mom! I breathed. It worked. All of it. The full AI, the split-second recalibration, the multi-target decision branches. It worked. She gave that quiet laugh of hers, the one that sounded like hope and fatigue all at once. I never doubted you. They're going to sign the contract this week. If that happens... I hesitated, voice catching. You'll be in that new trial, the one in Austin. No waiting list, private room. You mean I'll get to see what your 30th birthday looks like? She said softly. I bit my lip and turned away from the building. Yeah, you will. Back inside. The debrief started. Officials took turns praising the system. 4 people mentioned my name. Each time I felt it like a stamp on my skin. Real, permanent, earned. But then he walked in. Tall, crisp suit, perfectly calibrated smile. He introduced himself as Marshall Crane, financial strategy advisor, recently appointed to the board. Never heard of him. He hadn't been at any of the prior development meetings. But now, here he was, asking detailed questions about system scalability, licensing, long-term deployment logistics. Too detailed, too rehearsed. I folded my arms, forcing a neutral expression as his questions shifted from tech specs to IP ownership. Not security, not ethics, just control. Something inside me twisted. Everyone else kept laughing, congratulating themselves like the future had already been signed and sealed. But I didn't join them. Because while they were watching a drone fly, I was watching something else take off. And it didn't feel like success anymore. It felt like the first move in a game I hadn't agreed to play. The invitation came through a brief email. No subject line. Just a single sentence. Lunch tomorrow? I'd like to understand the scope of your work better. Monsieur Crane. I stared at the screen longer than I should have. There was nothing overtly threatening about it. But something in the tone rubbed me the wrong way. Understand the scope? We'd already reviewed specs in the control tower. And Marshall hadn't asked a single question then. Now he wanted a one-on-one? Still. I agreed. Curiosity beat out caution. Barely. We met at a small French bistro a few blocks from the Ethereum campus. He was already seated when I arrived, waving like we were old colleagues instead of 2 people who'd shared maybe 30 seconds of airspace the day before. The moment I sat down, he smiled and skipped the formalities. I'll be brief. Rowan, what you've built, Raven X. It's beyond impressive. But with a system that advanced, I imagine the ownership logistics are layered? I stiffened slightly. Layered how? He chuckled. Well, proprietary frameworks, patent filings, command access points. I assume you've retained some personal stake in the code? Or did the company buy out your rights during the R&D phase? I picked up my glass of water slowly. The IP agreement is outlined in my contract. Standard terms. Sure. He nodded. Still, if it were me, I'd keep a kill switch, a fingerprint on the core, just in case. I stared at him, trying not to react. He took a casual sip of wine, as if he hadn't just laid bare the exact thought that had kept me awake during development. You're a financial advisor, I said finally. Why the interest in system architecture? He smiled, unfazed. Because if this tech becomes our primary product line, I need to understand every possible risk. Financial, strategic, and human. I didn't finish my risotto. I barely touched it. The moment I got home, I locked my apartment door, silenced my phone, and opened 3 different laptops across my dining table. I spent the next 14 hours straight reviewing my entire source code repository, line by line, block by block. Then, I copied the original, the real system, onto a secure offline drive and buried it under layers of biometric encryption. That one stayed with me. Next, I built a decoy. It looked identical, functioned 98% the same. But deep inside, I embedded a silent mechanism, a countdown, 90 days. If it went that long without receiving biometric confirmation, specifically my fingerprint and heartbeat, the system would automatically begin a silent lockout protocol. No warnings, no alerts, just gradual decay. First, the AI decision matrix would fail to update. Then the flight control subroutines would drift, one by one. The drones would fall out of sync. Eventually, they'd go dark, unreachable, unusable. Ghosts. I called it Protocol Eclipse. I didn't know exactly what Marshall was planning, but I knew people like him. People who used charm like camouflage, who saw brilliance as a resource to be mined, not protected. He didn't care about the mission. He cared about market value. And I'd spent too long building RavenX to watch it become a trophy on some investor's shelf. So while the rest of Ethereum slept that night, I stayed awake with a countdown ticking silently in the machine they would soon steal. And the moment they took it, that clock would begin. The email hit my inbox at 6:43 a.m., just as I was pouring my first cup of coffee. Subject: Leadership Transition, 10 a.m. briefing required. From Executive Office, Ethereum HQ. There was no salutation, no explanation, just a time, a room number, and a line that made my stomach drop. Please be prepared to review all active project asset ownership status. I arrived 10 minutes early. The executive conference room was already half full. Board members, legal counsel, 2 people from HR I barely recognized, and Marshall Crane at the head of the table, looking far too comfortable for a man who'd only joined the company a month ago. The seat that had always been reserved for CEO Kenneth Marlowe sat empty. My palms began to sweat. Marshall stood and tapped his folder once against the table. Let's begin. No good morning, no introduction, just, let's begin. He spoke like he'd been rehearsing this for weeks. Effective immediately, Kenneth Marlowe has stepped down from his position due to undisclosed health reasons. As per internal board vote, I will be stepping in as acting CEO, pending confirmation. My brain stuttered. Kenneth hadn't said a word. No goodbye. No email, nothing, just vanished. And now this? Marshall's voice carried on, smooth and sterile. With this change, we are conducting a full review of team structures, leadership alignments, and strategic compliance. In that regard, Ms. Vega, would you stay behind when this meeting ends? My heart slammed against my ribs. Every pair of eyes flicked toward me, some with pity, some already indifferent. The meeting adjourned 15 minutes later. Everyone filtered out, except for Marshall, a legal rep, and the woman from HR, whose name I still didn't know. Marshall folded his hands. Rowan, I'll get right to it. We've reviewed internal communications, compliance reports, and team feedback. Your approach under the previous administration, while effective in R&D, hasn't aligned well with new collaborative protocols. What protocols? I asked. Voice brittle. No one's shared a single new directive with me. He offered a polite smile. That's precisely the issue. You've demonstrated resistance to executive integration. It's created a culture of independence that no longer serves our unified direction. I stared at him. So I'm being fired. He nodded once. We're calling it a strategic release. I felt everything rush out of my body at once. Heat, air, sound, strategic release. Like I was an underperforming asset. He slid a folder across the table. Inside, my severance agreement, an NDA, and an IP reassignment form. I blinked at the last one. I'm not signing that. Then I'm afraid your final paycheck, benefits, and health coverage may be delayed pending legal clarification. My stomach twisted. Mom's immunotherapy trial, without coverage. She wouldn't make the next round. I looked down at the document again. The form listed a code-based transfer authorization for the Raven X system. The version ID matched the decoy I had embedded just 2 nights ago. They were trying to take the bait, and I had to let them. With shaking hands, I signed. It felt like a piece of me detached the moment ink met paper. Thank you, Marshall said, as if I'd handed him a birthday gift. He stood and nodded to the HR rep. Escort her out. I gathered my things in silence, a numbness spreading like frost across my chest. At the security desk downstairs, I handed over my badge. The guard didn't look at me, just dropped it into a box labeled Terminated Access. Outside, I finally let myself exhale. I'd given them exactly what they wanted, what they thought was real. But as I walked toward the parking garage, my phone buzzed. An anonymous message appeared on my screen. Check your personnel file. Confused. I logged into the secure portal using my still active credentials. What I saw made my blood run cold. Under final notes, someone had added, subject exhibited signs of paranoia and control instability. Recommend observation if contacted externally. They hadn't just taken my job. They'd planted a question mark beside my name. And that kind of stain doesn't wash off easily. The next morning, I opened my company email out of habit and immediately remembered I no longer had one. The login screen blinked coldly. Access denied. Unknown user ID. I stared at it for several seconds, the cursor pulsing like a silent insult. Then I closed the laptop and sat there in the stillness of my kitchen. Alone. As the weight of it all started to land, they hadn't just fired me, they'd erased me. No goodbye, no press release, no public recognition for leading the 4-year development of Raven X. I was airbrushed from the timeline like I'd never existed, still clinging to some fragile hope that logic would win out. I checked the company's website. Right at the top of the homepage was a banner headline, bold and polished. Ethereum unveils groundbreaking drone AI, a vision realized by Marshall Crane and his elite strategy team. I blinked. My name was nowhere. Not in the article, not in the team list, not even in the footnotes. The accompanying photo showed Marshall at the center of a conference table, surrounded by people who'd had nothing to do with the architecture of the system. I recognized 2 faces. Both junior engineers I had mentored personally. One of them was wearing the same blazer I'd once lent her during a cold morning presentation. Now she sat smiling beside him like she'd designed the entire back end. My phone buzzed with a text from Theo, a back-end dev I'd worked with closely since the earliest prototypes. Theo, check this out. Marshall just renamed the control hub to CraneNet, changed all passwords. Full lockdown. CraneNet. I actually laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was so incredibly arrogant. I couldn't decide whether to scream or throw something through the window. It didn't matter that they'd stolen the decoy system. Didn't matter that Protocol Eclipse was already counting down silently inside every single drone. Right now, the world believed Marshall Crane was the mastermind. And I was nothing. I refreshed the company portal again, not expecting anything new. But then I noticed something that made my stomach clench. I opened the HR benefits page. I still had a copy of my mom's insurance registration linked to my account. Her name was gone. No active policy, no linked dependent, nothing. I clicked through every page, scanned every document, vanished. No email, no notification, no warning. The coverage I had secured for my mother, the one keeping her in the clinical trial that might save her life, was severed without so much as a line of red text. I called the hospital in a panic. "Rowan Vega?" the billing assistant asked. "I'm sorry, it looks like your insurance policy lapsed as of midnight." "Lapsed?" I repeated. "There must be some mistake. There's no active employer-linked policy on file anymore." My voice broke before I could finish the call. I sat down on the floor, legs giving out beneath me. I pressed the phone to my forehead and tried to breathe. This wasn't just professional sabotage anymore. This was personal, vicious, deliberate. They hadn't just cut me out of Etherian. They'd punished my mother for my existence, for hours. I stayed there, paralyzed between grief and fury. I knew how the game worked. Bury the threat, rewrite the narrative, control the narrative. But I hadn't expected them to be so thorough, so heartless. By late afternoon, I deleted every shortcut to Etherian from my devices. The name itself made me nauseous. My home no longer felt like mine. The air inside it was different, stagnant, heavy with the scent of humiliation. But somewhere beneath all of that shame, something sharper was forming. They thought I was broken, but they hadn't broken me. Not yet. The drones were still in the field, and the clock was still ticking. By the end of the week, I had no choice but to sell my car. It was a practical decision. My mother's medication wasn't covered anymore, and the clinical trial coordinators had warned me they couldn't hold her spot without proof of insurance. I listed the car online that morning and handed over the keys before dinner. The buyer didn't haggle. I didn't look back. With the cash, I paid for one more round of immunotherapy, one more week of borrowed time. I spent that night in her hospital room, curled into the narrow recliner beside her bed. Machines hummed steadily around us, dripping drugs into her veins, while her chest rose and fell in shallow rhythms. Her skin was pale, paper-thin under the fluorescent lights. She stirred around 3:15 a.m. and reached for my hand. "I hate seeing you like this," she whispered. "You don't have to worry about me." I lied. "You just focus on getting better." But she saw through it. She always did. "You worked so hard," she murmured, "and they just threw it all away." I swallowed hard, staring at the IV line. "They didn't throw it away. They think they won." Her eyes drifted closed again. I leaned forward, pressing my forehead to the back of her hand. "We just need to wait," I whispered. 90 days, that's all." She didn't respond, but I knew she'd heard me. That number had been living in my head like a metronome, ticking just beneath the surface of everything I did. Every time Marshall smiled for a camera or dropped my name from another press release, the number tightened in my chest like a noose. They didn't know what they were holding. They didn't know the system had a pulse, and soon, it would flatline, by design. The following day, I received a text from Theo. "Something's off with Unit 047. Can't load new flight maps. Tried 3 times. Keeps rejecting firmware." My heart skipped. Unit 047 was one of the first production drones shipped out to the company's proving grounds in Nevada. Standard training run, autonomous mapping of varied terrain. But if the update was being blocked, that meant the encryption layer I had buried in the decoy system, Protocol Eclipse, was beginning to pulse. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it was there, like a hairline crack beneath a polished surface. I messaged him back casually. "Could be network lag. Try hard reset, then call support." I didn't want him digging deeper, not yet. But inside, something shifted. For the first time in days, the ache in my chest loosened just slightly. They had activated the clock the moment they deployed the first drone. They didn't know it, but it had already begun. They could rename the platform. They could rewrite the press releases. They could even erase me from their records. But they couldn't rewrite the code. And the code remembered me. That night, I returned to the hospital and held Mom's hand again. The machine still beeped steadily, though I knew she was getting weaker. She stirred once, blinked toward me, and tried to smile. "You still have that look," she whispered. "What look?" "The one that says you're not done yet." I smiled through the exhaustion. "I'm not." I didn't tell her about Unit 047 or the blocked firmware. I didn't tell her that in a few weeks, 217 drones would begin losing sync, one by one, until silence echoed across Ethereum's shiny new empire. I just kissed her forehead and said, "Rest," because I wasn't finished, not even close. And the best part? Neither were the drones. They rolled out the red carpet like he was some kind of war hero. Marshall Crane stood behind the press podium on the east lawn of the Capitol, flanked by American flags and Defense Department banners. His suit was perfectly tailored. The sun caught his cufflinks just right. Every camera in the nation was pointed at his face. Behind him, a massive LED display cycled through animations of the Raven X system. Sleek black drones arcing through mountain passes, intercepting missiles mid-air, scanning terrain like futuristic hawks. My drones, my code, my design, and not one syllable of my name anywhere. I sat in the corner of a small cafe, 2 blocks from my mother's hospital, watching it all unfold on a mounted television. The closed captions clicked across the screen as Marshall declared the future of national defense had arrived, delivered by Ethereum, executed under his leadership, secured in a record-breaking $2.7 billion contract for 217 units. Applause followed. Officials shook his hand. A general even saluted him. I stirred my coffee with a wooden stick until it splintered in half. For a brief moment, the jealousy tasted bitter. Not because I wanted the attention, not even because I wanted the money. What I wanted was acknowledgement that the blood, sweat, and sleepless nights I poured into Raven X had meant something, that I hadn't been so easy to erase. But that bitterness passed quickly, because I glanced down at my tablet, the one synced to a private monitoring script I'd embedded deep within the decoy system weeks ago, and there it was, a blinking red icon in the upper right corner of the screen. Eclipse status, 17 days remaining. I smiled. Just barely. Protocol Eclipse was right on schedule, in just over 2 weeks. The system Marshall paraded in front of the world would begin collapsing beneath him. Not all at once, no. That would be too kind. This wasn't designed to crash. It was designed to erode. Quietly, systematically, undeniably. Out of curiosity, I tapped into one of the diagnostic logs feeding back from their Nevada training zone. Unit 026 had failed its altitude recalibration sequence 3 times in the last hour. Unit 031 couldn't resync its terrain map. 4 others showed misalignment in threat priority sequencing. 6 drones, already drifting off course. It was happening. I flagged the anomalies and saved a copy to a hidden folder on a secure drive. Not for sabotage, for proof. For the moment, they'd inevitably try to blame the supplier, the engineers, or even the government, because when this fell apart, I wanted them to know exactly when it started and who saw it coming. The barista brought over a fresh cup of coffee without asking. I looked up, startled. "On the house," she said. "You've been watching that guy on TV for 30 minutes and haven't blinked." I gave a soft chuckle and nodded my thanks. "He used to work for my company." She raised a brow. "Looks like he's doing pretty well." I looked back at the screen. where Marshall was shaking hands with the Secretary of Defense, teeth gleaming. "For now," I said quietly. The cafe returned to its usual hum. I sipped the coffee and leaned back in my chair, feeling something shift inside me, not anger, not even resentment, just clarity. They had the spotlight, sure, the cameras, the headlines, but I had the clock. And it was counting down, second by second, underneath every drone they believed they controlled. Let them celebrate, because when the lights dimmed and the cracks began to show, they'd realize too late the real architect never left. The message came through a private Proton Mail account I hadn't seen in months. Subject: Need to meet, off the grid. Sender: T. I knew who it was the second I saw the initial. Theo, the last person at Etherian who hadn't turned their back on me. We hadn't spoken since the day I was escorted out of the building. His location was encrypted in the email footer, an old bike shop near the outskirts of the city. No cameras, no foot traffic, no questions asked. I arrived just after 9 p.m. Hoodie up, phone off, backpack slung over one shoulder. Theo was already there, pacing the back alley behind the shop, eyes scanning the street like we were staging a heist. "You came alone?" he asked, voice low. I nodded. "You?" He held up both hands. "Just me." He reached into his coat and pulled out a flash drive. "What's that?" "Proof." His voice tightened. "They're losing control of the core. Fast." We ducked into the storage garage and closed the heavy door behind us. The room smelled like oil and old tires. But it was silent. Exactly what we needed. He plugged the drive into my laptop, and within seconds, hundreds of log files loaded across the screen. Error reports, blocked access attempts, failed patches. I scrolled through each one, my pulse quickening. "These are all from the primary hub?" I asked. Theo nodded. "Marshall ordered us to rewrite control permissions, but every 72 hours, the core locks itself again. It's like it forgets the override exists." "It doesn't forget," I said. "It rejects it." I opened one of the deeper log clusters and scanned the timestamps. 3 failed authentication attempts from the new system admin, 4 more the next day. Then the lockout protocol kicked in, just like I built it to. "They don't know," I whispered. Theo looked at me. "Know what?" "That the system they're using isn't theirs." I glanced at him. "They're not running the platform. They're renting time on a ghost copy, one I control." Theo exhaled slowly. "That's why the firmware isn't syncing." I nodded. "And it's only going to get worse." We sat in silence for a moment, both of us understanding the weight of what this meant. They weren't just fumbling with the controls. They were balancing on a system wired to reject them. He hesitated, then added, "I found something else. The code they're pushing into production, it has a signature." I froze. "What kind of signature?" Theo pulled up a snippet of raw code and pointed at a comment string buried deep within it. RV D297A, verified instance, proprietary pattern lock. It was mine, my watermark. A digital fingerprint I'd embedded years ago to track copy distribution during beta testing. I had forgotten all about it, until now. "They're using your code," he said, "and they don't even realize it's stamped." I stared at the screen, a strange calm settling into my chest. Not anger this time, not even triumph, just certainty. "They're building a billion-dollar empire on stolen software," I said, "and that watermark makes it traceable." He looked at me. "What are you going to do?" I closed the laptop slowly. "I'm going to let them keep building." Theo frowned. "Why?" I met his eyes. "Because the higher they go, the harder they fall. Let them sign contracts. Let them deploy. Let them attach their names to every piece of it." I zipped the backpack and stood. "And when the system collapses, when everything breaks in real time, I'll walk in with this." I tapped the laptop. "And show them who it really belongs to." Theo gave a small, crooked smile. Remind me never to cross you. I smiled back. You won't. That night, as I walked home through quiet streets, I felt no rage, no panic, no need to prove anything. The facts would do that for me, because there are some things they'll never be able to control. And I made sure I was one of them. I hit send just before sunrise. The email was brief, factual, and written without emotion. I attached 4 log files, each clearly timestamped, each showing systemic failures within the RavenX platform. I didn't name names, didn't accuse anyone of theft. I didn't have to. The recipient knew how to read between lines. Senator Langston had once sat in on a classified drone briefing I led 2 years ago. A former engineer before politics swallowed him whole. He respected code more than corporate titles. I knew he'd see the truth behind the errors, and the danger in ignoring them. I didn't expect a reply. I just needed one pair of qualified eyes watching the implosion from a seat of influence. By 11 o'clock a.m., the countdown was no longer theoretical. Reports began leaking from inside Ethereum. Engineers working at the Nevada deployment site were privately messaging former colleagues. Frantic questions, phrases like random targeting shifts, unscheduled reboots, loss of formation logic. Protocol Eclipse had begun its slow decay cycle. Not a full crash. That would be too merciful. This was precision sabotage, like rust beneath polished steel. I monitored everything from my apartment. Blinds drawn, coffee cold. My laptop lit up with back-channel updates, each one tighter, tenser than the last. Theo confirmed the operations team had escalated the issue twice within the hour. Marshall hadn't responded. Of course he hadn't. He was likely in another meeting with polished investors, showing off charts while the core of his empire quietly unraveled. At 1:15 p.m., a low-level analyst from Ethereum's field diagnostics team attempted a forced firmware push on drone unit 062. The system rejected it. Error code, lockauth.fingerprint mismatch. That was me. The tension in my chest felt like coiled wire. I watched as 6 more attempts failed across different units. They didn't know it yet, but the drones were no longer just drifting. They were actively walling themselves off. I picked up my phone but hesitated. I wasn't ready to speak to anyone. Not yet. I didn't want congratulations. I didn't want sympathy. What I wanted was clarity, precision, proof that everything I had built, everything they had stolen, was finally turning against them. And then, it came. A message from an unknown number. No text, just a JPEG attachment. I opened it. It was a photo of the original RavenX schematic, printed and pinned to a corkboard. My schematic. My annotations in the margins. Even the coffee stain from that night I spilled espresso in the lab at 3 a.m. during a firmware rewrite. Across the top of the page, someone had scrawled in red ink, Creator, Rowan Vega. No signature, no context. Just that. I stared at it for a long time. Somewhere out there, someone new. Someone inside, or close enough to the system, had broken ranks. Maybe it was Theo, maybe not. Maybe it was someone I didn't even remember mentoring. Someone who had watched me get erased and refused to stay silent. I saved the image to an encrypted folder. Then I turned back to the live logs. 17 drones had now failed their hourly sync tests. 5 had entered fallback mode. 2 were no longer responding at all. And still, no public statement from Ethereum. They were trying to contain it, pretending it was a blip, a minor technical hiccup. But deep inside, they were sweating. I could feel it in the pattern of their actions. They were rebooting systems manually, attempting redundant uplinks, even swapping out field technicians. None of it would work, because the problem wasn't on the surface. It was in the bones. That night, I sat in silence, fingers hovering over my keyboard, eyes watching the numbers climb. 17 days had become 12. 12 would become 8. And when the counter reached 0, the real silence would begin. The morning of day 90 arrived quiet. almost reverent. The city was just waking up, fog still hugging the sidewalks, delivery trucks hissing down empty streets. I sat at my desk with a mug of untouched tea and two open laptops, both connected to shadow systems embedded deep in Ethereum's server structure. The countdown clock read 0, 14 seconds. My pulse ticked louder than the quiet digital hum of the machines. Part of me didn't believe it would work, not entirely. I'd never tested Protocol Eclipse in full. No one had. It wasn't built to be tested. It was built to end things. I watched the screen roll to 00, 00. Nothing happened, not right away. But at 8 a.m., a red status bar blinked once in the upper left corner of my monitoring screen. Drone Group Alpha, signal lost. 6 seconds later, Drone Group Echo, unresponsive Drone Group Delta, sync failure. Then it was as if someone had flipped a switch inside a cathedral full of machines. All across the Ethereum network, connection pathways collapsed like dominoes. One by one, entire fleets began to vanish from the cloud dashboard. They didn't crash. They didn't explode. They simply disappeared. By 8:02, over 100 drones had gone dark. On the other side of the country, inside Ethereum's command center, technicians shouted over each other, frantically typing override commands that had no effect. Their keystrokes couldn't reach the system anymore. They weren't admins. They were ghosts knocking on locked doors. Then, at exactly 8:12 a.m., the last drone, Unit 173, blinked out of existence on the network. Total blackout. My screen, usually alive with telemetry lines, dropped to a single message across the center. Neural lock failure. Authentication timeout. Security protocol 2.27a. Permission revoked. I exhaled slowly. That was my code. The 2.27a designation was a personal marker, based on the date I first built Raven X's decision core. No one else knew it meant anything, but I did. Across the country, chaos was blooming behind locked doors and muted conference calls. I didn't need access to their cameras. I could feel it from here. Executives yelling into phones, Marshall pacing in fury, engineers desperately trying to trace the breach they'd never find. Because it wasn't a breach. It was a design. Meanwhile, something else was unraveling outside their digital bubble. At 8:15, the Pentagon's morning press briefing began in D.C., a televised event meant to showcase Ethereum's achievements and reinforce public confidence in the Raven X contract. The spokesperson barely got through her first paragraph before a reporter raised his hand and interrupted. "Is it true," he asked, "that the recent drone outages are the result of an internal lockout, not a cyber attack?" The room shifted instantly. The spokesperson froze. Another journalist stood up, waving a printed image. "We received this from an anonymous source this morning, schematics showing an embedded failsafe in the system code. It's labeled with the name Rowan Vega. See." My name echoed on the live stream like a detonator going off. The feed cut to static within seconds. But it was too late. The question had been asked. The evidence had been shown. The collapse was no longer private. I closed my laptop and sat back in the chair, my body buzzing with 1,000 volts of release. For weeks, I'd walked around carrying a pressure that never loosened. The shame, the silence, the erasure. It had been like holding my breath in a room full of people pretending I didn't exist. Now, they knew. The drones were gone. The truth was leaking. My signature was public. And the countdown? The countdown was over. The phone rang at 10:05 a.m. Unknown number, blocked ID. But I already knew who it was. I let it ring twice, then 3 times, before finally answering on the 4th. Just to let the silence stretch. His voice was tight, panicked, stripped of the polish he wore so proudly at press briefings. "Rowan," Marshall said, like we were old friends. "Listen, we need to talk." I stayed quiet. "There's been a disruption," he continued, forcing a weak laugh. Something in the core system is triggering a mass shutdown. I know you know about it. We both know you had access. Still. I said nothing. His tone shifted. The mask dropped. Okay, fine. Just tell me. What do you want to stop this? We'll settle. You'll get credit, back pay, hell, stock options. Just help us reset the system. It was everything I'd fantasized about hearing. But in reality, it landed like static. Too little. Too late. I finally spoke, my voice calm, level. I didn't break the system. Marshall, I just set a clock. He paused. What kind of clock? The kind that starts ticking the moment someone gets greedy. He exhaled hard on the other end. I imagined him pacing in that oversized corner office, tie yanked loose, suit jacket discarded, while around him the empire cracked at the seams. You think this helps you? He snapped. You've just sabotaged a national defense contract. You'll be blacklisted from every tech firm in the country. I almost laughed. You already did that when you deleted my name. He fell silent again. Then, in a quieter tone, he muttered, The Department of Defense just pulled the contract. I sat up straighter. They what? They terminated the deal, effective immediately. We got the notice 15 minutes ago. They're opening an investigation. I leaned back slowly in my chair, letting the words settle like music. I hadn't known that part. It was better than I imagined. Apparently, he added bitterly, they received a packet of internal error logs, along with copies of early design drafts, signed by you. Another pause. You sent them, didn't you? No, I said honestly, but I made sure someone would. He sighed like a man slipping underwater. This ruins everything. I nodded, though he couldn't see me. That's the idea. There was a long stretch of silence. No pleading this time, no bargaining. He knew. This isn't over, he said finally. It is for you, I replied. You just don't realize it yet. Then I hung up. The call ended with a hollow click. No final threat, no attempt at redemption, just silence, the kind that feels earned. Outside my window, the sun was breaking through gray clouds, casting long streaks of light across the floor. I turned my phone off, set it face down, and let out the first deep breath I'd taken in months. I had no illusions. There would be fallout, legal motions, PR warfare. People would try to spin the narrative, but none of it mattered. The system was gone. The contract was dead. And Marshall Crane, the man who stole my work, erased my name, and mocked my silence, had finally been brought to his knees by something he never saw coming. The truth. I walked over to my kitchen table and opened the envelope I'd been saving. Inside was a printed letter from the clinical trial director at St. Agnes Cancer Center. Subject: New slot confirmed for Patricia Vega. Full cycle approved. I pressed the paper to my chest, tears welling, but not from defeat. From relief. From the rare, electric satisfaction of justice served exactly on time. Not with violence, not with revenge, but with precision, with proof, with patience. Because I hadn't just taken back what was mine. I'd let him walk into the trap all by himself, and when the walls closed in, all I did was answer the phone. The invitation came wrapped in legal formality and political subtext. The Senate Armed Services Committee requests your appearance as an expert witness in the matter of Project Raven X. I stared at the letter in my hand, fingers motionless. For a long time, I'd imagined confronting Marshall. I'd dreamed of a courtroom, maybe even a press conference. But this was bigger. This was history, unfolding in marble halls under cold lighting and national scrutiny. And for once, I wouldn't be behind the curtain. The hearing chamber was quiet when I entered, though every chair was filled. Senators from both parties lined the curved table, staffers scribbling behind them, cameras quietly recording every word. I'd worn black, nothing dramatic, just clean and sharp. Let the facts speak. Senator Langston sat at the center. He gave me a nod. Brief but meaningful. His eyes told me, now's the moment. I raised my right hand, swore to tell the truth, and took my seat. Ms. Vega, Senator Langston began, please state your credentials for the record. I did so. Name, position, degrees, security clearances, and the 4-year development timeline for Raven X. All of it from memory. No script, no notes. And in your own words, he continued, what went wrong with Ethereum's deployment? I didn't flinch. I believe what went wrong wasn't technological, I said. It was ethical. A murmur moved through the chamber. I built Raven X to save lives. I continued, voice steady. To assist soldiers in the field, to make reconnaissance smarter, faster, safer. What it wasn't designed for, what it was never meant to become, was a bargaining chip, a trophy to be paraded in front of investors, a tool to boost stock prices. I paused, then looked directly at the chairman. They didn't understand what they were holding, and when they stole it, they triggered a sequence they couldn't stop. There was silence, not because they disagreed, but because they were listening. I opened my folder and slid 3 documents forward to the committee clerk. The first was a time-stamped design log from the original Raven X kernel, signed with my biometric ID. The second, a legal contract showing no transfer of ownership or licensing to Ethereum. The third, an encrypted access record proving that Marshall Crane's admin credentials were forcibly rejected by the system more than 30 times in a 72-hour span. Every line of code is traceable, I said. Every mistake, every cover-up, every attempt to rewrite the history of this program, I kept records, not out of revenge, out of responsibility. Senator Langston leaned forward. And why did you embed Protocol Eclipse? I met his eyes. Because I knew someone would eventually try to take it without understanding it. I wasn't trying to destroy the system, I was protecting it from misuse. Another senator asked whether the shutdown was intentional sabotage. No, I said clearly. It was controlled self-defense, a lock on a door I built, one only I could open. I didn't break anything. I simply refused to let them hold it hostage. The questioning lasted 2 hours. I answered everything. No spin, no rage, just truth, cold, precise, undeniable. And at the end of it all, Senator Langston glanced at the committee clerk and said, let the record reflect that Ms. Rowan Vega has provided conclusive documentation of sole authorship, time-stamped logs of development, and unrebutted proof of system-level design control. He turned to me. Congratulations, Ms. Vega. You are now legally recognized as the exclusive owner of the Raven X system and all derivative intellectual property. I didn't smile. I didn't cry. I just nodded, once, because the world finally knew what I'd known all along. I had never lost control. They just thought I had. Offers flooded in the week after the hearing. Some came wrapped in velvet, gentle, flattering words from major defense contractors, asking me to reconsider. Others were more aggressive, dangling 9-figure buyouts for the Raven X system, complete with NDAs and promises of total creative control. But none of them asked the right question. Not a single one asked what I wanted Raven X to become. So I gave my answer without a press release, without a headline. I walked into the offices of Skybridge Global Aid, a small nonprofit that used aerial tech for humanitarian relief in disaster zones, search and rescue, food drops, medical transport. Their drones were outdated, underfunded, but their work was pure, mission first, no egos, no markets. I handed them a flash drive and a handwritten letter. Inside, the full source code to Raven X. No patents, no fees, no contracts. Just this. Use this to protect, not to profit. Build a future that flies toward people, not away from them. The executive director cried when I told her it was theirs. She offered to name the next drone after me. I told her not to. This wasn't about me anymore. That evening, I visited Mom at the hospice center. The treatments had slowed her decline, but time was still a cruel accountant. Her voice was faint, her eyes glassy but aware. I sat beside her and held her hand. "You don't have to wait anymore," I whispered. "It's done. I got it back. All of it." She smiled, soft and slow, like she was finally exhaling a weight she'd carried for both of us. I stayed with her until midnight, watching her breathe. There was no rage left in me, no bitterness, just quiet, a steady beat in my chest that no longer sounded like revenge, only peace. And while I closed one chapter, another was ending somewhere else. On day 180, precisely 6 months after the drones had vanished from Ethereum's network, Marshall Crane was sentenced in federal court. 3 counts of intellectual property fraud, 2 counts of falsifying federal defense reports, 1 count of obstruction of investigation. The gavel fell at 3:47 p.m. I didn't attend the trial. I didn't need to. I already knew the outcome the moment the countdown began. Some clocks aren't meant to measure time. They're built to end the ones who waste it. If you've made it to the end of this story, I hope you felt every second of the countdown. Not just the fall of someone corrupt, but the rise of someone who refused to disappear. We live in a world where silence can be weaponized. But sometimes, silence is strategy. And when the time is right, the truth makes more noise than revenge ever could. If this story moved you, let us know in the comments below. What would you have done in Rowan's place? Hit that like button if you believe innovation should be protected and purpose should be louder than profit. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder. Your voice still matters, even when they try to erase it. And don't forget to subscribe for more powerful, true-to-life stories of resilience, justice, and the quiet strength that changes everything.